Have you noticed? The loaf of bread is still there. The carton of eggs is still there. The coffee is still there. But somehow, everything is a little more expensive, a little smaller, a little fewer choices. The most unsettling thing is not when shelves are empty. It is when shelves are full. But the foundation behind them is shrinking. No out-of-stock signs, no panic, no emergency announcement. Just you gradually switching brands, choosing smaller sizes or skipping a familiar item because the price is no longer the same. Modern shortages do not make you hungry. They lower your standards, little by little. And if you look closely, the following 12 foundational foods are under pressure worldwide. This is not a loud crisis. This is the system tightening. 12. Coffee Arabica. One morning you walk into the supermarket and realize the coffee you have been drinking for 20 years is no longer on the shelf. No sign, no announcement. Just a small gap in the familiar spot. Coffee is not a survival food, but it is a rhythm. A quiet moment before the day begins. The thing that makes everything feel normal. Arabica, the most widely preferred coffee in the world, is also one of the crops most sensitive to temperature. Brazil and Colombia, the two largest global suppliers, have repeatedly faced drought, unusual frost, and extreme rainfall in recent years. A shift of just a few degrees can affect output. Lower production leads to higher prices. Higher prices lead retailers to narrow their selections. They keep the fastest-selling lines, while smaller brands quietly disappear. Coffee does not vanish from the supermarket, but the one you have relied on for years may no longer be as easy to find. Or it is still there, in a smaller bag, at a higher price. This is how the system contracts, not loudly, not with announcements, just a little less, each year. For people living on fixed income, each increase of a few percent does not create an immediate crisis. But when multiple items rise together, the margin of safety begins to thin. Coffee is just one global commodity, dependent on stable climate and a complex supply chain. If a morning habit can be affected by a few degrees of temperature change, then the issue is no longer coffee. It is the fragility of the system behind it. Major shifts rarely begin with an explosion. They begin with familiar things, gradually becoming less. 11. Beef. The U.S. cattle herd has fallen to its lowest level in decades. Years of prolonged drought have depleted pastures, reduced water availability, and sharply increased feed costs. When grass is not sufficient, ranchers are forced to sell off parts of their herd earlier than planned. Rebuilding the herd cannot happen in a few months. The cattle reproduction cycle takes time. Retaining heifers, waiting for breeding, raising them, and only then entering the supply chain. It is a multi-year process, not a matter of weeks. When the herd shrinks, beef supply tightens structurally. Recent data show that the total number of U.S. cattle and calves is at its lowest level in roughly 75 years. When supply is low while demand does not decline proportionally, prices respond immediately. Ground beef prices have risen to record highs during recent fluctuations. The more affordable cuts disappear from shelves first, because that segment faces the greatest pressure. Beef does not disappear from the supermarket. The shelves are still full. But the choices are not the same as before. Lower-priced ground beef is harder to find. Steaks are thinner. Tray weights are smaller. Prices are higher. These changes do not happen overnight. They unfold slowly, slow enough to avoid panic. A man in his 60s said he had bought the same ground beef for weekend dinners for years. Last year, he noticed the familiar tray felt lighter while the price was nearly the same. A few months later, that option disappeared. Only the more expensive one remained. He did not react strongly. He simply started buying less. When the lowest priced cut disappears first, the pressure is not on the shelf. It is in the cost structure. Beef is a foundational protein for many households. When a basic protein becomes unstable, the food budget gradually tightens. Not because meat is gone, but because the same meal now costs more. The system does not collapse, it tightens. And beef is one of the places where that tightening becomes most visible. 10. Cooking oil, sunflower oil, canola oil, vegetable oil. The clear bottles sitting quietly on supermarket shelves look so simple they are almost invisible. But behind each bottle is a supply chain stretching across multiple countries. When war disrupts global sunflower oil supply, prices react immediately. When drought reduces canola harvests, the market becomes more sensitive. When fuel and transportation costs rise step by step, oil prices are pushed higher. It only takes one broken link for the entire system to begin to tremble. You may not follow commodity price charts. You notice the change in another way. The bottle you bought last year was 48 ounces. This year, it is 40 ounces. The price barely drops. The lowest cost brand no longer appears as often. The shelf is still full, but there are fewer choices. This is not a loud shortage. This is a quiet contraction. Cooking oil is not the main dish, but it is the foundation of the kitchen. Without oil, you do not fry, sauté, or bake. When oil prices rise, the cost of cooking rises with them. When cooking costs rise, family meals are no longer as affordable as before. Eating out is more expensive. Staying home is more expensive. There is no immune option. For those living on fixed income, each price increase of a few percent does not create an immediate crisis. But when multiple foundational items fluctuate at the same time, the financial margin of safety begins to thin. Cooking oil does not cause panic. It does not disappear from the shelf. But when the basic fat of the kitchen becomes unstable, it is no longer about taste. It is a sign that the structure behind it is under pressure. And major changes rarely begin with an explosion. They begin with familiar things, gradually becoming more expensive. No item is completely gone, but each year you pay more for the same meal. That is quiet contraction. 9. Infant formula. A few years ago, when a major plant had to halt operations for investigation and product recalls, formula shelves in many places were empty within weeks. Not the entire supermarket, not every item, only the product for infants. And that was enough. Infant formula is not produced by hundreds of small facilities. Most of the supply is concentrated in a handful of large plants, operating near full capacity to optimize costs and keep prices competitive. When one facility temporarily shuts down for safety inspection or quality issues, the line cannot restart immediately. Verification, testing, and redistribution take time. Meanwhile, the modern retail system maintains low inventory to save costs, so gaps appear very quickly. And there is another reality that anyone who has raised a child understands. Not every baby can use just any formula. There are specialized formulas for allergies, digestion, or medical needs. When the exact one disappears, there is no simple substitute. No waiting a few weeks. No room for error. A grandmother once wrote, "I raised 3 children. I never thought there would be a day I would have to drive everywhere just to find the right formula for my grandchild." That statement carries no panic. It carries instinct. The instinct to protect. If it were your grandchild, you would not wait for the market to adjust on its own. You would go look immediately. Infant formula shows that the modern system is powerful when everything runs smoothly. But it also shows something else. High efficiency does not mean multiple layers of safety. Shelves may be full 99% of the time, but the remaining 1% is enough to make people think. And when a product meant for infants can depend on just a few concentrated production points, the stability we are used to may only be temporary. 8. Cocoa. Real chocolate global cocoa prices have risen sharply as production in West Africa declined significantly. Ghana and Ivory Coast supply most of the world's cocoa, and in recent years they have repeatedly faced irregular rainfall, prolonged high temperatures, and crop disease. When supply is concentrated in one geographic region and that region faces trouble, the market has little room to adjust. Cocoa trees take years to mature. When production declines, it cannot be replaced in a single season. Money cannot make trees grow faster. And when the input tightens, the entire chocolate production chain behind it begins to adjust. I noticed it in a simple way. Late last year, I bought a familiar box of chocolate to bring to my grandchild's house for the holidays. The price was clearly higher. The bar was smaller. The packaging barely changed. No notice said cocoa was in shortage. It just felt like everything was a little more expensive, a little less. Chocolate is not a survival essential, but it is part of family tradition. Christmas boxes, Easter eggs, dessert after dinner. When things tied to memory begin to fluctuate because of weather on the other side of the world, it is no longer just about a sweet. I do not stockpile dozens of pounds of chocolate, but I have started buying higher real cocoa content varieties while prices are still acceptable and keeping a small, steady amount. Not out of fear, but because when a long-cycle ingredient like cocoa shakes, it shows that the supply chain behind it no longer has the same cushion as before. The system does not collapse over one chocolate bar. But when small things change first, history shows that larger things rarely remain unchanged for long. 7. Sugar rarely disappears from the shelf. It is still there. The familiar white bag. It looks completely normal, but behind it is a supply chain more complex than many realize. Sugar cane and sugar beets require stable weather to reach high yields. When prolonged drought or irregular rainfall reduces output, supply immediately comes under pressure. The refining process consumes significant energy. When fuel prices rise, processing costs rise with them. Sugar is a high-volume, low-margin commodity, so transportation costs directly affect the final retail price. And when some countries restrict exports to protect domestic supply, the global market tightens quickly. But what matters is not that a bag of sugar rises a few percent. Sugar is not only for sweetening coffee. It preserves jam and canned fruit. It provides structure to baked goods. It balances flavor in sauces and processed foods. When sugar prices rise, the entire food chain behind it begins to adjust. Candy becomes more expensive. Sauces increase in price. Canned goods cost more. Inflation does not spread with noise. It spreads through foundational ingredients like this. I realized that last summer when I planned to make a few jars of jam as I had done for years. The price of sugar was clearly higher. Not shocking. Just enough for me to notice. The packaging was the same. The weight nearly unchanged. But the total cost for one batch of jam increased. I did not stop making it. But I began keeping a small, steady amount in the kitchen, not to panic stockpile, but to avoid being caught off guard if prices moved again. For many people in their 60s, sugar is tied to memories of the family kitchen, making jam in summer, baking during the holidays, canning fruit for winter. When the foundational ingredient for those traditions begins to rise in price because of weather, energy, and transportation, the change does not come from one dramatic shock. It comes from everything becoming more expensive at the same time. Sugar does not create a crisis. It makes everything else more expensive. And when foundational ingredients rise, inflation does not need to be loud to spread. Do you still make jam, bake as before? Or have you started cutting back because of rising costs? 6. Eggs. There was a period when, within just a few months, egg prices multiplied as avian flu forced millions of laying hens to be culled. That did not happen because people lacked food. It happened because the modern production model depends on very large-scale farms. When an outbreak occurs, it is not a few hundred birds affected, it is millions. Eggs seem simple, but behind them is a highly concentrated system. Large facilities, dense housing, maximized output. This model is efficient when everything is stable, but when disease appears, the margin of safety is thin. Laying hens cannot work overtime. A new flock takes time to mature and begin steady production. Eggs are not a luxury food. They are the most affordable protein for the middle class. A quick breakfast, a cake ingredient, a budget meal when finances are tight. When meat prices rise, many families switch to eggs. When eggs rise at the same time, the gap begins to show. I still remember walking into a supermarket and seeing the egg shelf nearly empty. Not because everything collapsed, just because for a few weeks, the system could not adjust fast enough. People in their 60s did not panic at that sight. But they understood one thing. If the cheapest protein can swing sharply, then stability is no longer the default. I do not stockpile hundreds of eggs, but I began diversifying protein sources in the kitchen, not relying entirely on a single option. Because when one basic item shakes, the chain reaction often follows. Eggs are not just breakfast. They are an early indicator of the food system's resilience. Do you remember when egg prices were at their highest? How did you adjust your family meals? You may not notice when prices rise 10%. But when 6 items rise 10% at the same time, that is no longer coincidence. 5. Canned tuna. Canned tuna has long been a backup protein for many families. No freezer needed, no complex cooking required. Just open the lid and there is a meal. When beef prices rise, many people turn to tuna. When budgets tighten, it feels like a safe choice. But tuna is not a resource that can increase output on demand. It is a wild-caught supply, dependent on international quotas and the health of ocean ecosystems. When harvest levels are limited to protect stocks, catches cannot suddenly expand to meet market demand. Fuel cost is a factor few people think about. A long-distance fishing vessel consumes a large amount of diesel. When fuel prices rise sharply, many fleets reduce trips or scale back operations to avoid losses. Supply does not disappear completely, but it begins to contract in the lower price segment first. Consumers do not see quota maps or fuel price charts. They see smaller cans, prices a few percent higher, value packs selling out the fastest, premium tuna still on the shelf, but fewer budget options. Unlike livestock, you cannot grow more tuna in a few months. If catch limits tighten or fleets cut activity, the market has no acceleration button to compensate. That is the natural limit of this protein source. I once believed canned tuna was the most stable option in the pantry. But when fuel prices rose and fishing regulations tightened at the same time, I began keeping a moderate amount, not relying entirely on one choice. Tuna does not create a crisis. But when even a backup protein responds quickly to energy costs and catch quotas, a family's financial cushion begins to thin. And when the budget option is no longer as stable as before, it is not just a story about the ocean. 4. Frozen vegetables. Frozen vegetables look very stable. Bags of peas, broccoli, pre-cut mixed vegetables. They seem to always be there. But behind the freezer aisle is a supply chain more sensitive than many realize. Frozen vegetables depend on concentrated harvest seasons. When the crop is ready, factories must wash, cut, blanch, and freeze almost immediately to preserve quality. If irregular weather reduces yields, the raw input tightens at once. There is no backup warehouse for fresh produce. Once the season passes, it passes. Then there is electricity. The cold chain does not allow interruption. From the processing plant to distribution warehouses to the supermarket, everything depends on continuous freezing systems. When electricity costs rise, storage costs rise with them. When a processing plant faces disruption or labor shortages, reduced output is not easily replaced. Consumers do not see this on the news. They see their familiar vegetable disappear first. Not the entire freezer empty, but less variety, fewer brands, fewer lower-priced options. I realized this one winter when I looked for the familiar vegetable mix I usually buy and could not find it. The freezer was still stocked, but the exact one I used was gone. No one announced a shortage. The choices had simply contracted. Frozen vegetables were once the stable option when fresh produce was expensive or out of season. But if one of three elements, harvest, electricity, or processing capacity, faces disruption, variety disappears first. Vegetables do not vanish. But when the freezer aisle offers fewer options, it signals that the cold chain behind it no longer has the same cushion. Have you noticed fewer frozen vegetable choices in your usual supermarket compared to a few years ago? 3. Perishable fresh produce. Tomatoes, onions, lemons, tomatoes. Onions, lemons, the most basic items in the kitchen. You can still buy them. The shelves are full, but their prices can shift within just a few weeks. Fresh produce depends directly on weather more than any other food group. A prolonged heat wave can reduce tomato yields. Heavy rain can affect onions. Unusual frost can destroy an entire lemon crop. When a key growing region faces extreme weather, supply drops almost immediately because these are products that cannot be stored long-term like grains. Unlike canned food, fresh produce has very little buffer. From field to supermarket is a short-time chain. If the harvest is weak or transportation is delayed, prices react quickly. You may see tomatoes inexpensive this week, nearly double the next. Not because of a global crisis, just because one crop was affected. I noticed this when lemon prices spiked in a short period. Not completely unavailable, but enough to make me think each time I placed them in the cart. Small fluctuations like this do not appear on front pages. They appear on weekly receipts. Fresh produce is the foundation of a healthy meal. As climate becomes more unpredictable, fresh food becomes the fastest to react to weather. Not disappearing, but fluctuating more, less stable. And when the simplest ingredients begin shifting week by week, stability in the kitchen no longer comes from routine, but from adaptability. Have you noticed tomato, onion, or lemon prices changing more sharply compared to a few years ago? 2. Dried beans. Dried beans are one of the most affordable and durable protein sources in a middle-class kitchen. No freezer needed. No dependence on a cold chain. Long shelf life. When budgets tighten, many families return to beans. But beans are not immune to agricultural pressure. Production depends directly on harvest conditions, irrigation water, and fertilizer prices. When prolonged drought hits or input costs rise sharply, planted acreage can shrink. Beans are often not the highest profit crop for farmers. So when fertilizer and fuel costs increase, growers may switch to more profitable crops. Because beans operate on thin margins, even small fluctuations in production or transportation costs are reflected in retail prices. There is little cushion. When bean prices rise, it is not because luxury demand increased. It is because the agricultural foundation behind them is under pressure. I noticed this when the familiar bag of beans I usually buy increased in price while meat had already risen before. Not doubled, not shocking, but enough for me to pay attention. Beans were the stable option when everything else became expensive. When even the stable option begins to edge up, a family's financial cushion gradually narrows. I do not stockpile dozens of bags, but I keep a moderate amount and rotate it regularly because dried beans are a foundation, not a temporary substitute. Beans are not a luxury food. They are the base layer of many families' meals, and when the foundation begins to shake, the layers above it struggle to remain balanced for long. Do you still see beans as the most economical choice for family meals the way you once did? 1. Wheat flour. Wheat is not a secondary item. It is the foundation of bread, pasta, cookies, batter, and hundreds of dishes in the family kitchen. When wheat fluctuates, the impact does not stop at one shelf. It spreads across the entire food system. Wheat is directly affected by conflict in major producing regions, by fertilizer prices, which depend on natural gas, and by fuel costs for agricultural machinery and international transport. If just one of these factors rises sharply, production costs change. When several happen at the same time, the market responds very quickly. Unlike fresh foods, wheat can be stored. But global supply still depends on a few key regions. When exports are disrupted or production declines because of drought, futures prices rise before consumers even notice. A few months later, flour and bread prices reflect it. I realized the level of dependence when bread prices kept rising over a year. Not suddenly, but step by step. The familiar bag of flour cost more. The loaf was smaller. The packaging looked nearly the same. There was no sign saying wheat shortage, just higher foundational costs spreading outward. Wheat is the base of the simplest meals. When that base shakes because of conflict, fertilizer, fuel, and transportation, the effect does not stop at one product. It reaches every family budget. I do not overstock, but I keep a steady amount of flour and rotate it, because when a foundational ingredient fluctuates, the chain reaction often lasts longer than a single season. Wheat is not just a grain. It is a measure of the resilience of the entire food system. And when that measure shifts, every number behind it shifts as well. Preparing is not about panic. Preparing is about staying calm. You do not need to stockpile an entire room. You just need to understand what the foundations are. The shelves are still full, but the choices are changing. If today you could choose only 3 items from this list to keep as backup, what would you choose? Share below. Here, we are not talking about fear. We are talking about calm preparation.